Nothing makes me happier than when I can tell that someone is a Decoder listener and they came fired up for the Decoder questions.
Remember when mobile was a big thing and like the iPhone came out?
Yes, I remember the genesis of my career. This is the underlying thesis of the show. This is why I get to ask the question every time. Hello and welcome to Decoder. I'm Nilay Patel, editor-in-chief of The Verge, and Decoder is my show about big ideas and other problems. Today I'm talking with Willem and I, who's head of product at Square. You know, Square was started by billionaire Jack Dorsey of Twitter fame more than 15 years ago, and it got big on the back of that little magnetic reader that plugged into the headphone jack on the iPhone and let small businesses accept credit cards. Now, of course, Square is much more than a credit card reader, and sadly, the headphone jack is ancient history. Square itself is part of a new parent company called Block, which is made up of a really interesting mix of financial services, like Cash App, the digital wallet and payment platform, the buy now, pay later service Afterpay, and quite a few other subsidiaries. And that's where this episode becomes pure Decoder bait right from the jump. As you'll hear Willem explain, Block restructured the entire company last year into a functional organization so that it shares resources across all of its units. So I asked Willem about how all of that works, and his answer might surprise you. It's also a very weird time for money. When you combine what's happening in decentralized finance and the Trump administration's interest in crypto with things like the discontinuation of the United States penny and the overall turbulence of the economy, well, Square's pretty deep on all of it. It's a company that processes transactions for all kinds of cash businesses every day, and at the same time, it holds large reserves of Bitcoin and is working to enable merchants to actually transact in cryptocurrencies. There's a lot going on in this episode. It's a pretty fun one. I can always tell when I'm talking to a Decoder fan, and Willem is someone who came ultra prepared to talk about not only his org chart, but how he makes decisions. You will actually hear him use French winemaking terms to describe his decision-making process, which might be as nerdy as we have ever gotten on Decoder. Okay, Square's head of product, Willem and I. Here we go. Willem and I, you are the global head of product at Square. Welcome to Decoder.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'm excited to talk to you. It's an interesting time to run businesses. It's an interesting time to run businesses connected to the internet. It's an interesting time for money, which is an odd thing to say, but it is an interesting time to money. I suspect you and I are going to talk about the end of the penny quite a bit on this episode.
That'd be great.
As somebody who has to accept literal cash at restaurants, it seems like we should talk about the penny. Let's start at the start. I feel like everybody knows what Square is. Everyone's seen the reader. I have a lot to say about the headphone jack and how it enabled the Square reader and how it went away. I think people listening to the Vergecast know I have a lot of feelings about headphone jacks on cell phones. But we've all seen Square. We've all seen the hardware, certainly. What do you think of Square as a company, as a product?
Yeah, a lot of people have seen us in coffee shops or farmers markets. The interesting part about Square is that we serve sellers that are very small, farmers markets, all the way up through Chase Stadium and everything in between. We've been hard at work building kind of this comprehensive commerce platform that helps sellers really of all types run their business better with Square. In the very beginning, the kind of innovation was on your mobile device, you could quickly take payment. And our focus has really been to help sellers accept any sale. And that's kind of how we got started and how we ended up here today.
I'm going to do it. I'm going to talk about the headphone jack. I promised myself I would not get totally sidetracked with what enabled the first Square reader, but it is interesting to me. Accept any payment in a world where most payments are going digital, or at least passing through a credit card, and lots of people don't even have wallets or cash anymore. You are in direct competition with cell phones in like a very real way. And the reason I bring up the headphone jack is that first Square reader was just a card swipe, and it plugged into the headphone jack, and it passed the magnetic data from the stripe on the card through the headphone jack to the Square app, and suddenly the phones could read credit cards.
That's right.
And that was an open interconnect, maybe the last great open interconnect on cell phones. The cell phone companies have a lot of thoughts about me talking about it this way, but it was the last great open interconnect. And then obviously that went away, and you moved to a Bluetooth reader, and now you have dedicated hardware. But, you know, on iOS and Android, you can just beep a credit card to it. You can beep a phone to it. There are other kinds of payment transaction services that are available in just apps. Maybe you don't need an open interconnect anymore. How do you think about Square in that ecosystem?
We've always wanted to help sellers get started easily, right? So Square is, you can download the app, sign up, and get going within seconds many times. And as the payment landscape has evolved and the hardware interconnect landscape has evolved, we've kind of supported both the Lightning plug or Lightning jack for Apple and then USB-C now. And our hardware and software ecosystem is really meant to support both When you want a really pro device that's all in one, right, running kind of our own Android and kind of our own version of Square Point of Sale, all the way through integrated kind of beautifully designed hardware, all the way through just bring your own hardware, right? This is your cell phone. You can plug it in either to Bluetooth or one of our kind of jack-based card readers. And then now tap to pay is really blowing up, right? So if you get started, you can just click a button, get registered with Apple or Google, and easily just boop, take a payment. And we're seeing like a huge amount of adoption, particularly in the smaller sellers that kind of value portability and value kind of being able to kind of take payments easily. As far as like an open ecosystem, ecosystems evolve. And I think it's important to realize that and be able to kind of lead through those changes.
The reason I start with open ecosystems is, that easy initiation into Square, where I'm a merchant, I download the app, and someone can just tap their phone onto my phone and pay through Square. That is very powerful, right? That is the selling point for a lot of small merchants.
That's right.
It's just that easy, and it's the hardware they already have. And somewhere in the middle of that is whether or not Apple wants you to do that in a way that they could not really stop you from doing it with the headphone jack. There's been a lot of controversy on what Apple will and will not let you do with the NFC reader on the phone, with the other parts of the phone. Has that come up with Square?
Not as much as you'd think, right? I mean, it's in Apple's best interest, I believe, to provide APIs and accessibility to let kind of sellers, people use products on their devices. Apple's in a lot of news around a lot of other things that they're doing with the app, the App Store. We on the business side of software and the business side of payments, we haven't really felt kind of a lot of those constraints. And Apple's a fantastic partner of ours as we continue to innovate.
That was a good managed PR response to Apple being a good partner. I love it. I can see them coming a mile away. One of the reasons I'm starting here, because I want to get to the big parts of Square. How does Square interact with the death of the penny? The reason I'm starting so like on the ground in the weeds is the move from this is the thing that can accept payments to we are running your business to there's Square AI in your product roadmap, and it will custom develop applications for you as you ask about your data. And that is the future of all businesses. And now we're running, stadiums. It starts with we can accept the payments as easily as possible.
That's right.
How do you think about that slide to we can accept the payments? It's so easy when we Square are your payment provider. You should just let us run your business. How do you think about that transition and that journey for somebody who signs up just to take payments at a farmer's market?
So when you talk to sellers and you listen to the challenges that they have, running a small business is one of the hardest things ever, right? These are the true definition of entrepreneurs, right? You're putting your livelihood on the line many times to start something that you're passionate about, and they kind of reach for software and technology to help them run their business, right? So in the beginning, it's just an idea. Right, I want to sell something, right? And you get started small, and you start taking payments. Very quickly, you struggle with, okay, I need to manage my inventory better, or I need to hire my first staff member, and manage schedules and manage payouts and all those other good things. And the idea with Square and the kind of ecosystem that we've built is that every step along that journey should feel simple. And then as you keep getting larger and larger, we want to kind of constrain the complexity so that it stays easy to use our software. And that's an incredibly hard product and design challenge. But that's where we've kind of built our ecosystem organically rather than via acquisitions and kind of other strategies that companies grow. Because then we can maintain a bar for how sellers use these products, how they discover them. And I think that's really important to be able to kind of grow with the seller. The one thing we say at Square is like, a seller should never outgrow Square. Right. And that means we need to meet them where they are with all these different capabilities. You're right. It starts with just payments have to be good, right? If payments aren't good, fast, etc., then like nothing else matters. But as you get larger and larger, most of the problems, at one or two location seller face is staffing. Can I get folks to show up on time? How do I manage my staff schedules so that staff are happy? How can I manage my vendors and all the other costs of goods sold? As we know, costs are going up across almost every dimension in the industry. So the problems keep happening, right? And I kind of truly believe that you want to democratize technology, right? You want to take technology, and this is really relevant in the AI space. You want to take technology that's usually locked to just the very large corporations, the Wall Streets, et cetera, and bring them down to Main Street, right? And I think if you do that successfully and make that technology accessible, you can actually help society. Like you can make things better, right? You can get neighborhoods vibrant again, right? You can help these sellers because a lot of these small businesses fail, unfortunately, right? And it's because it's hard to run a business. And I think if you can apply technology effectively, you can run a better business, and you can kind of revitalize a lot of the main streets across the world.
That's a big mission. It's interesting, right? That implies that you're going to go from taking payments to helping more efficiently run businesses or helping small business owners more effectively run their businesses. I've heard variations of this pitch from, I wouldn't even call them competitors, from other companies that have an entry point into small business. Intuit was on the show, and they're like, we're going to run your whole back office. Squarespace has been on the show, and the slide for Squarespace to go from we set up your website to your website has a booking calendar on it to now we manage your bookings, we should manage your payments, we're going to do all of your invoicing, is very easy for them. It was very compelling. It was like, oh yeah, I started a website. Now that you run my front end, you should run my back end too. Like, I get the pitch. And it all starts with, we're going to do one thing and we'll expand everything else. Is that how you think of Square and that same ecosystem? That your competitors are other providers who start with one thing and are trying to expand the entire back office?
I would think in broad strokes, yes. I think the unique part about Square is that because we build and design all of our own hardware, kind of from the chip up, that we can provide, I would say, better end-to-end experiences than competitors that may be starting in other areas. And at the end of the day, for the majority of brick and mortar businesses, the point of sale is the artery, so to speak, right? Like quick serve restaurants, retail restaurants, even a lot of services that need kind of this kind of help make a sale. It's important to think that if you do the core things that a business really needs done super well, then I think it gives you the ability and the believability that you can build additional products. And then one of the unique things about Square and then Block is that we've also been able to build other business units like Cash App and kind of other complete ecosystems, which is pretty interesting.
Do you think of like Toast as your competitor? Like Toast makes hardware. It's in point of sale in restaurants. Is that the big competitor? Is it other hardware companies? How does that work for you?
While I think about competitors, I don't obsess over competitors. I think it's better to obsess over customers. But one of the unique things about Square is that we can serve effectively almost any type of seller: retail, food and bev, health and beauty, services, etc. And the reason why that's, I think, really interesting is that when you think about our competitive set, yes, like, for food and bev at the large end of the market and quick serve and full serve restaurants, it's Toast, it's Q, it's a couple other folks. In retail, it's like Lightspeed and Shopify. Health and beauty, there's a bunch of scheduling products out there. Services, mainly Intuit, QuickBooks, Service Titan, et cetera. And then I just kind of come back to what a lot of these sellers need is like they need a rock solid platform and software to help them run their business. And as you kind of build some of these capabilities, a lot of the needs across these industries rhyme, right? And I think that's where you can leverage platform in our ecosystem, especially on like, help me understand how my business is running, help me grow my business, help me manage my staff. There's a lot of like very core similar needs, so that we can then build, capabilities that we can apply across industries.
I'm fascinated by the fact that you said you think the hardware is a big differentiation, right? You design it from the chips up. That's a big investment. The cliche is hardware is hard. That has to run all the time. If the point of sale goes down, that's the end of that, right? Your sellers are probably moving on. How do you think about managing the hardware roadmap next to the software roadmap next to, hey, maybe the future of all these capabilities are on an AI roadmap somewhere else?
We have an incredible hardware team. Thomas Templeton leads our hardware team, and it's, I think, one of the best in the industry. So we partner very closely on making sure that we can form fit seller need, right? Like the form factors that they need to run their business with then the software workflows that work best. And it's a partnership. And the faster that we can iterate and deliver both software and hardware experiences together, I think the better off all the sellers will be.
I'll make the comparison to Apple or even to Google, right? Like every year, Apple shows off iOS, and then a few months later, they show off the phone, and it sort of embodies whatever new features of iOS happen. Google does the same with Android and the Pixel. Are you on that kind of roadmap where you're like, I've got a bunch of software ideas and the next version of the point of sale terminal will really bring them to life? Or are they separate in your mind?
A lot of the reasons why different hardware companies have different strategies is largely the how much the underlying hardware exposes APIs and enables the software behaviors, right? I think ultimately for Square, we can decouple those to a larger degree where we don't need kind of monolithic kind of hardware software release cycles, where we can be more nimble on the software side. And then yes, there's like step function improvements and things that get unlocked from a hardware capability side, but it's not as monolithic as some of the other kind of hardware companies out there.
What I'm really pushing on is the idea that it's the hardware that is the big differentiator here. What about what's the evidence for that? Is it the customer saying we love these Square terminals? Is it just that it's easier and more convenient? Is it that they're more reliable? What are the factors that make it the big differentiator?
Yeah, I would say this hardware and software working together is a differentiator, but specifically from a hardware perspective, I mean, the point of sale is front and center. Every single customer that at least in brick and mortar businesses where you're selling something, sees that hardware, interacts with it, both from a consumer perspective as well as a staff and employee perspective. So if we can build workflows that are delightful and simple to use on both sides of the counter, that I think makes the vibe of the business marginally better, right? And if we can help with that, and we can have customers walking away like, oh, that was fast, that was easy, that was delightful, and all the software and tools around that, as well as staff members, that's fast, it's easy to use, right? Kind of helping customers, making sure technology doesn't get in the way. And I think like at the most broad strokes, we kind of hope that most of our hardware and technology kind of fades into the background. We want our seller's brand to stand front and center. There's a lot of design decisions that we've made to make sure that stays true for a seller.
Do you ever do the Steve Jobs things where you pick up the pictures of like the BlackBerry and the Palm Trio and you're like, this is why they suck and this is why ours is better?
No, I haven't. I think, it'd be funny to do, but no, we haven't.
That's like a big vision, right? That we're gonna enable sellers of all kinds at every scale. We're gonna have hardware that's better, that is a better literal customer experience. And then I was looking at your public roadmap, and it is extraordinarily tactical in places. One of the items is there's going to be support for combo meals at quick service restaurants. Where do you think that balance is? That Square has to do the work to support combo meals, not the restaurant has to decide it wants combo meals and it can make Square do that.
The genesis for the public roadmap, and it's pretty unique for larger businesses in the space, is that we wanted to build out in the open, and we wanted to drive accountability for what we say we're going to do, we're going to go do, and we're going to do it with speed, velocity, and quality. As far as the granularity and the details of what we show in the roadmap, it's really a judgment call. My general preference is to show more, right, and make it kind of more raw and utilitarian, rather than maybe more polished. So I think that's why you kind of see everything, tiny little features, but also really big things will show up there. Specifically for combos and kind of some of the capabilities, it's important for when you run a business, the software has to work for how you want to run your business, right? And that's like how you merchandise your sales, how you present those kind of goods or food or services that you're creating and present them to customers. So that's why it's important, and sellers tell us this, but it's important to be able to help sellers model their business the right way.
This is going to be a very esoteric idea, but in my mind, all software is a combination of like metaphors and interfaces and templates, right? There's just patterns that repeat, and then the patterns match some metaphors. A combo meal like fits into that framework really well, right? Like you open a restaurant, you download Square, and it says enter your menu, and then you get to some part of the menu, and it says what are your combo meals, and maybe you'll just like enter them. Is that the kind of thing you want to do for people? Is templatize a restaurant so that they have combo menus? Because the other way of doing it is I run the restaurant, I invent the combo menu, and I just put it into the menu with a price, and that's fine. And there's no metaphor required, no further like the combo meal is made up of these three separate items.
I mean, I think what you need for any software, and I generally agree, a lot of software is like forms and lists of things, which is interesting as a reflection. But you need the core foundational primitives and constructs, right? Like, for example, in the hierarchy that those things, kind of how they're designed and engineered in the back end, are important to get right and are important to be flexible. You can't offer infinite flexibility, right? I think it's important for any software product to provide guardrails to a certain degree, and take opinions, because a lot of if you don't, it could just end up in like a super complicated kind of cockpit of knobs and levers and kind of forms and buttons that are really hard to use and understand.
Yeah, it's funny. I use the cockpit of knobs and levers all the time. But the thing I always think about is, okay, I run my little team, and if this was a submarine, like my managing editor needs to sit at a console with a lot of buttons. And how can I put the buttons in front of her so that she can do her job most effectively? She does not like this metaphor, and I don't think it actually works. And I think I would be bad at driving a submarine because I don't think that's how a submarine works either. But that's what you're describing, right? Is like, how do I put the various tools of the business in front of the person who operates the business? What's the dynamic between Square saying these are the tools we think you need that will be most effective, and the customer saying these are the tools we actually want?
Yeah, that's the art, and kind of mainly the art of building great products. It's one of the reasons why Square and Block as a company is a very design-led organization. I think design in its kind of most simplest form is kind of helping understand the core needs and building solutions and designing solutions to help solve those needs. And I think time and time again, I'm always surprised and delighted by like the creativity that comes out of basically a design team and org working closely with engineering to craft these experiences. I think if you have too much of a top-down view of exactly what you want to build, I think that limits the creative process, and in almost every time in my experience, it limits the end result of what you're trying to build. I think it's like an interesting thing to reflect on about different companies that have taken different strategies, right? Like very top-down requirements based approaches versus more, I would say, bottoms up creative kind of approaches, and kind of the different results that happen because of it.
Do you find that depending on how big your customers are, that they have different needs in terms of how to even describe their problems? Like, I imagine the person who downloads a Square app does not have a bunch of like out of the box ideas about how to design a payments workflow. And then I imagine the stadiums you work with have literal data analysts being like, this is exactly what we need to maximize our revenue. Like, how do you manage that wildly divergent set of needs or even communication styles?
This is one of the benefits for Square's open platform. So at the end of the day, like if you're a very small seller, you kind of just want to adopt all the features and products within Square mainly, right? Marketing, loyalty, everything really. And then as you start to get larger and larger, you want to pull in either tools that you want to use, right? So you, for whatever reason, it's a best in breed, barbershop loyalty program or whatever. And our open platform and open partnership strategy really helps sellers pick and choose the parts of Square that help them run their business best. And I think there's a continuum, right? So we want to enable our app marketplace and kind of our kind of developers, partners to be able to build on top of Square and extend capabilities that work well for them. And then that gives both sellers choice, right? We never want to hold data hostage. We never want to do those things, because ultimately, we want to help sellers run the best business. And if that means using a third party for some part of that, then we need to enable that.
I think I'm going to come back to AI in that part of the conversation as well too, because it feels like the future of a lot of third-party integrations is letting AI agents run between these databases. But I think it's actually a good time for the Decoder questions. Just take a step back.
Sure.
Right? I think I have a sense of what's going on at Square. Square is part of a company called Block. Jack Dorsey is the CEO of Block. Block is a wide array of interests, right? There's Afterpay, there's Tidal, there's all kinds of stuff. Where does Square fit into Block, and what's your relationship with Jack Dorsey as the CEO of Block as it relates to Square?
Yeah, so Block is the kind of company that has a bunch of brands in it. I'm responsible for the Square brand from a product perspective. We obviously have like sibling teams or sister teams in Cash App, et cetera. We functionalized the entire company earlier this year, actually late last year, and it was a big change, right? Before we had kind of a divisional GM business unit kind of organization, and we went to a purely functional. So there's engineering, product design kind of at the highest levels. And then within that, kind of brand focused teams that think about the different areas. Jack is an incredible leader and spends time with each of our brands, kind of both guiding kind of really the strategy, but also feedback on, fit, form, and kind of the actual products and the pixels that we're building. So it's kind of been great to work together with him a lot closer over the past kind of year and couple months after we've turned into a more functional org.
So inside of Block has a functional structure. There's one engineering team for Square, Cash App, and Tidal.
Yeah, Afterpay, et cetera. There's a single engineering org.
How do you fight for resources with the music streaming services?
My thesis for teams and prioritization is one, when we functionalized the company, we created a single set of priorities, right? So a single shared roadmap, right? If you have a single shared roadmap with clear DRIs for each of the areas, it makes a lot of these decisions a lot clearer, right? Because you can be like, this is more important than this, and then we can staff appropriately. I think that's one. I think two, though, it's also really important to make sure that like the teams and the squads are stable at kind of the kind of ground level that they're building. They have autonomy, mastery, purpose. They can go build the things for customers. And you kind of need to synthesize both kind of stability at the squad team level with kind of top-down strategic prioritization that's kind of happened. And I think that's been the biggest change and benefit from going from a divisional business unit structure to a functional structure, is that alignment is super, super important in a large organization, right? And if you create kind of different, effectively different mini startups or kind of product areas, which happens in a divisional org, then like, yes, you can kind of go fast in each of those directions, but you're usually going fast in like 14 different directions, right? Versus going fast and making trade-offs and being able to build together and kind of build something really incredible.
All right, I'm just going to push on this a little bit. I think I understand what you're saying, but just assume I'm much dumber than maybe people think I am. DRI is directly responsible individual. You said you had squads. I understand why you would want shared engineering resources for Square and Cash App and maybe even Afterpay, right? These are payment rails. Why does Tidal need strategy alignment with Square?
So not everything has to harmonize at like exactly the same strategy or exactly the same things that we're working on. It's more that when you functionalize a company, you can also make sure that each discipline is operating kind of at the highest levels, right? So both from a performance perspective, but also an accountability perspective. I think that's one of the key points. It's not like we're trading off people necessarily between Tidal and Square all the time. It's Tidal as a team, Square as a team, Cash App as a team, et cetera. And at the margins, we might make prioritization trade-offs, but in the broad strokes, that's kind of we have our strategies and we go execute on them.
This is the argument that I've heard for functional organizations at companies that have lots of disparate businesses, is that actually it's very hard to manage engineers. Actually, designers all want to work with other fancy designers. And the reason you would functionalize them is to hold all the engineers to the same high standard. And engineering management is, at a small-ish company, is too hard to break up. You can't hire enough good engineers, Right? Is that the thesis here?
Maybe I'll just take a step back about where Square has gone over the past 10 years, right? So in my journey at Square a little bit. So, Square in the beginning, I think Square 1.0, all right, this was a little white reader that we talked about earlier, right? This is kind of solely focused on growing, kind of, helping sellers make any sale. And then, we went to Square, let's say 2.0. This is where Cash App kind of grew and scaled as a separate business unit. Within Square, there was a GM divisional structure where we kind of really exploded our software ecosystem to help sellers with a bunch of different jobs, right? There was a GM for the staff tools, and there was a GM for kind of the order system, et cetera. As you know, companies go between kind of divisional versus functional structures all the time for various reasons. And I don't think there's a single right one for every company, right? It depends on the circumstance and the culture and the kind of market and a bunch of other reasons.
This is the underlying thesis of the show. This is why I get to ask the question every time. Because
everyone's
great. Like, I don't know, I picked one. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And I do think they oscillate based on different things. And I think the reason that kind of leads us to Square 3.0, which is really that there was a realization that the benefit of Block as a company. And the benefit of the two great products that we've built with Cash App and Square is that their strength really is at the connections between the business units. It was just very difficult to do that in a divisional model, right? Like the incentives are just completely misaligned. Divisional models work super well if you have like completely separate P&Ls and the products rarely have to talk to each other, and you can kind of hire and build whatever cultures you want within each of those areas. It doesn't work super well when you want kind of that, 1 + 1 to equal 3, let's just say, right? And I think that's kind of the realization for Square 3.0 is that we wanted to, one, build with velocity across the business units, and then two, kind of really build interesting products at the intersection between all those. So that's kind of the journey I believe Square has gone over the past couple of years, and one of the reasons why, like, very invigorating to work. I've been here for almost 11 years, a little over 11 years now. And I think it's the ability to move fast, the ability to make quick decisions, and the ability to kind of build these products at the intersection of both the business units. Just incredibly exciting and fun.
How many people is Block now, and how many people is Square?
I'll talk in generalities. We don't share them publicly, but Block has about 12,000. And we're capped. We're not growing past 12,000. And then Square's, I believe, roughly like 4,000 or so.
And then inside of that, how is Square structured? And I know the whole company is functional, but you have like a product team. How is Square generally structured?
The biggest challenge with Square, like I mentioned earlier, is that we serve every segment, right? We serve food, retail, health and beauty, services, kind of a long tail of other kind of types of sellers. So the core decision that we had to make to when we kind of restructure around functional versus GM was, do we organize by customer, or do we organize by like functional surface, right? So like, do you need like a retail team that wakes up every single day living and breathing kind of the retail customers and the retail workflows? Or do you kind of just have more generic pillars like, orders and payments and stuff like that? I think ultimately the decision we came to was both, and that we have kind of key product areas that are focused on food and bev, retail, local services. And then we have a whole set of, I would say, like kind of foundational product capabilities that span all the different verticals and audiences. They kind of work together to prioritize and build the best experiences.
Give me an example of those capabilities.
Banking is one. We have a financial suite team. So financial suite is, think about, a lot of the cost of goods sold. So things like reporting, accounting, kind of et cetera. Then we have a growth team. Right, every team needs kind of a growth org that helps with onboarding, conversion, et cetera. We have an identities and trust org, right? Helping sellers take payments safely and effectively is super important. We have a foundations team, right? So one of the things you need in, I would say, most orgs, either functional or divisional, is a team that's helpful for ensuring that the general experience, right, whether that be like navigation, design systems, things like that, are cohesive and good. And it kind of acts as a check and a balance to a lot of the product teams that are moving very fast to build capabilities across their areas. And then there's a couple other product areas as well. Customers, for example, staff and payroll. We could kind of keep going on. The ecosystem is broad.
Put that into context in terms of, we're going to roll out combo meals for quick service restaurants, right? Is that your growth team heard from a bunch of quick service restaurants that entering combo meals was too arduous and you need a template for it? Was it the team that actually services restaurants is like, this is the capability we think they need? Where does that idea come from? How do you implement it? And how do all those teams work together to do it?
It really starts with the strategy and the customer problem, right? So we strategically say that QSRs and F&B is a priority for Square, which it is. They're kind of the cornerstone to the neighborhood. And it's kind
F&B
of where
is food and beverage.
Yeah, sorry. Food and beverage sellers. And then quick serve restaurants are kind of like your fast casual kind of burger, burrito, et cetera, salad spots. So we kind of start with the customer and the strategy and be like, okay, what are the key things that they need to do? And then basically that's kind of the top down. This is where we're going. And then each of the kind of orgs and product areas come up with, okay, these are the key needs. And the combo specific example, that would be the F&B team kind of thinking, okay, this is really, really important for these types of sellers, and then works closely with the catalog team and a couple other teams to be like, okay, we got to prioritize this. And in any sizable org, you always have to kind of make sure dependencies are mapped, and kind of different teams can work through the things they need to deliver.
Yeah, I think this brings me directly to the other question I ask everybody on Decoder. Right, prioritizing the roadmap. That's you're the head of product. That's the decision. How do you make decisions? What's your framework?
I'm excited for this question. So I think one is I kind of think about this in two ways: so tactical and strategic decisions, right? So at any org of any size, speed and decision making and making sure that the machine doesn't get jammed up, so to speak, is critical, right? So part of our decision-making process, I think, for the org, and then I'll get into mine specifically, is that you want to make sure teams, right, the squads and the teams at the ground level have rituals that they can get decisions made quickly. So at the team level, we do pit stops, which are multi-times per week. They can get unblocked. And then at the leadership level, we have what we call unblock meetings, right, which is anyone can kind of sign up and bring a decision to kind of cross-functional leadership to kind of weigh in on a path. We aim to have decisions made within 48 hours or less. Very difficult to get to that timeline all the time, but that's kind of just a stake in the sand that we've put. So that's the tactical side. I think on the strategic side, the thing that I've kind of been reflecting on is that I think you need the terroir of decision making, right? You need the right ingredients as a leader to be able to make decisions, and I think it's really steeped in a few things. First is like deep customer empathy. It's hard for me to believe that you can make great decisions if you don't really understand who you're building for and why you're building for them. I think two is you have to understand the market. You have to understand the history of the market, like kind of like maybe the environment that you're competing and building products in. And the last one is just constraints. And I think you need to understand, effectively, intuitively almost, what the different trade-offs and constraints are. If you have kind of all those, and I joke with my team, like your gut is the best trained ML model on the planet, right? Like it's just the synthesization of all the things that you've seen over your entire career, day to day, right, in and out. And I think if you have kind of a lot of those components, then you can be, quote, good at making strategic decisions. Then if you think about like actually making them, the biggest thing is like, should you make it or should someone on your team make it? And like if it should be you, great. Then you need to decide like how much information you need to make said decision. And in that case, it's usually starting from the customer and working backwards, right? Want to ask you last note. I think decisions are kind of important, but what's even more important is just alignment of the entire org, right? So in a larger, this is why startups can move fast. Alignment is simple. You're like literally sitting with 20 of your coworkers and you can make a decision and just run immediately. Right now, if you think about a remote company or a larger company, alignment becomes more and more difficult as you add more people into the equation. Right. So I think it's important that when decisions are made that, I know a lot of people talk about disagree and commit or whatever. Great. It's really just another way to say, can we align on this thing and can we go run as fast as possible? So I think a lot of my job and a lot of my team's job is to make sure that we have that alignment. At Block and Square specifically, the kind of singular roadmap and top of priorities help with that. And then within that, the DRI model can, help make sure those decisions are cascaded down, owned, and kind of driven towards completion.
Nothing makes me happier than when I can tell that someone is a Decoder listener and they came fired up for the Decoder questions. Like if you do a show like this, you're like, I did it. Like that's great. I can tell you've been ready. There's that, right? There's the best laid plans. There's systems and frameworks. It sounds like you have a lot of authority and you push down a lot of that authority. Then there's the CEO, and you have a famous CEO who, at least in public, plays a very eccentric character. Is that a stabilizing force? Is that a destabilizing force? What is it like to work for Jack Dorsey?
I think it's one of the reasons why I'm still here 11 years in. I think Jack is an incredible visionary leader. I sometimes joke that I think he like lives in the future. He just has a great intuitive sense about what's important for customers and where markets and things are going. Jack and kind of his directs are really responsible for setting the overarching strategy of like, these are the big opportunities, where we want to go. We've made some good decisions and we've made some bad decisions at the kind of corporate level. I think with the new focus of kind of these functionalized teams, we're making better decisions every single day, again, from that alignment, and actually forms for Jack to weigh in and kind of provide guidance and input on things that teams might be struggling with.
Is he the same character in your meetings as he is on stage at various conferences?
He's very similar. Yeah, definitely.
One of the ideas, I mean, besides the beard, which I think is him trying to live in the future as much as possible, Seer from the year 3000, right? He's big on Bitcoin. Square accepts Bitcoin. Square holds a lot of Bitcoin. He's big on AI. Obviously, there are some AI integrations that I absolutely want to talk about with you. Where is he pushing you the hardest?
He's pushing the hardest on AI. We have, kind of automation is one of our top priorities as a company. And it's not just automating products for sellers, it's also just automating internal processes, right? And that's, everything from kind of support, sales, all the way through compliance, risk, et cetera. And, there's just this fundamental belief that if there is a process, we should try as hard as possible to automate it. I think it's exactly the right push, just because of how much and how fast this technology is changing and improving. There hasn't been a technology in, let's say, like past 20 years that improves by like an order of magnitude every 12 months. Right? There just really hasn't in a long period of time, and we can debate on a lot of the impacts of that, but you kind of have to skate to where the puck is going. It's kind of like, if I take a step back. Remember when mobile was a big thing and like the iPhone came out?
Yes, I remember the genesis of my career. Yeah.
A lot of companies at that stage had like a little mobile team off to the side building a little app, right? And that was the strategy for a lot of companies. A lot of those companies didn't make it. Right? The companies that made it were the ones that reimagined how they should work with this new way of reaching customers and this new technology, right? Uber reinvented transportation in a mobile device, right? Square, I would argue, reinvented payments on a mobile device, right? And I think, we could debate if AI is another one of those kind of seismic shifts. I believe it is. And I think companies that embrace AI and kind of really ingrain it with both the products that they're building, but also the internal processes they have, are the ones that are going to make it. And the ones that don't, might not.
All right, let's debate it. I'm ready. I've been thinking about this a lot. The idea that a business is just a collection of databases and that you should connect those databases and run your business more efficiently, right? That's the metaphor. Like I see it everywhere now. Everyone that I talk to about AI is like, finally, I can send my agent off into some database that previously had some weird API and it was very brittle. I can set up the MCP server and it can just finally tell me all the information that I've always needed to know to sell widgets more effectively. Mm-hmm. And I say that not with derision. I just say it because I hear it so much. But even on Square's roadmap, that is kind of what Square's AI roadmap looks like, right? You're going to have a bunch of information in your business, and you, the small business owner, are never going to set up all the tools to get value from that data. So you'll just ask the AI. The AI will build the tools, and then you'll have it. And that is a very big vision of the future. Like I see that. I see why you're describing it as a big vision of the future. That is not a big user interface shift, right? That is a software architecture shift. Now the databases can just talk to each other like old friends or like whatever they're going to do. But it's not we need phones to make Uber because the internet is with you all the time. How do you bridge the gap? Because that is the thing that I see most of all. We started off by talking about how Square's differentiation is hardware. And now we have to re-architect Square for the AI era. And I can't quite connect those two things together.
Just correct. I don't think Square's only differentiator is hardware. It's one of the key things. But I want to come back to the customer, right? These small businesses, whether you're running one location or like 10 locations, making good decisions, right, is actually like one of the hardest things about running a small business. You just don't have a ton of time, right? You're sweating, making sure that, you've got your food delivery, the ingredients showing up that day, that your staff is showing up that day, that you're doing enough on marketing to make sure that you can generate interest for your business. At the same time, you have access to data, but it's very difficult, to, investigate and interrogate that data in a meaningful way for your specific business. So if you kind of just think about the customer, it's really the first time that, the interface for accessing decisions and data is not some complicated UI with a bunch of drop downs and buttons and charts that are not always, even if you build them beautifully, like just hard to use, right? Getting access to data across all the different dimensions of your business, right? Sales, customers, et cetera. And then, the intuitive thing about like, okay, I want to look at, my sales on a rainy day versus not a rainy day, over the past, summer. There's a pretty complex questions, or like, how are my tips different on rainy days versus not, right? And I think for the first time, these kind of agentic systems give sellers a natural language way to answer questions about their business, like kind of letting their curiosity run free. And I think that's super unique in kind of a set of technology. So you're talking about like, hey, the interface isn't so different. I would argue that the interface is completely different now for two reasons. One, almost every interface in, let's say, maybe Web 2.0 world was synchronous. You had to sit there and you had to push a button to get an action. Now, for the first time, you can have asynchronous things, right? It can do something on your behalf and it will check with you for approvals and making sure that I can go do that. But I think that combined with the fact that it's a more natural, both voice and text, right? Soon we're going to, voice is really good. And, honestly, I know Siri had some struggles, but like, voice is getting like really, really good as an agentic interface. When you combine both of those and you combine just that these sellers are busy, right? And now they can, meaningfully know how their business is working and make better decisions. What I think happens is that we see better business outcomes for these small businesses, right?
Can I sit in the rainy day tips example for 1 second
sure.
to make this real? It strikes me that even knowing to ask, do I get better or worse tips on rainy days, requires a level of insight, right? Like, why do you think your sellers are going to ask questions like that?
So there's kind of two things that we're thinking about. One is sellers intuitively know their business far better than we do, right? Like, just honestly, right? They wake up, they're in it every single day. They know the things that are keeping them up at night, right? Should I stay open an extra 30 minutes? And what does that do to my tips on Thursdays or whatever? I don't want to discount how well they know their businesses. So, there's very specific things they want to find out to help them run a better business. And I think the interesting next step is how we can be more proactive and proactivity for suggesting things that they may not be thinking about. And this is also when you combine these large language models with tool use, right? You can actually get very grounded, correct things to help them understand what's happening. And that's like a really key investment area for both us and most of the industry.
I'm going to force you to sit in that example. I know you just was off the cuff, but I want to sit in it because it is useful for me to think about real examples. Does tip revenue increase on rainy days? I'm going to ask Square's AI that question. Does Square have a database of historical weather patterns? You have to go out and get it? Like, that's right. Just foundationally, that's the first task. We need to know what the weather was like on some days. We need to understand whether it was raining or not, maybe how much it was raining. We need to synthesize that with a database of sales that has both like the core revenue and then the tip revenue in it. And then we need to plot that out. I have asked various LLMs to do tasks like this, and sometimes it works. It works to a degree that is high enough that I understand why the entire industry is betting on it. And sometimes it just crashes out, man. Like, just doesn't work at all. First, tell me, do you have a database of weather that you've been tracking against sellers? Like, right, this is just a first problem. And then how do you make sure it works every time?
This is part of the art of building, I would say, products in today's age, right? So there's a few things, like kind of when ChatGPT first came out and a lot of these large language models came out, there was a lot of quote hallucination, right? You would ask these things, they'd just be like blatantly not true. The real innovation, in my opinion, is one, they've gotten better at pre-training and better kind of data inputs. But the second really is that we've taught, basically these large language models to do better agent loops. This is one of the reasons why like Gemini and ChatGPT are much better now, is that they integrate search data, right? They can like enrich their context with actual data from tools. So if you think about the specific example on rainy day tips, what we do is we have an MCP ecosystem that we connect our kind of AI tools to, and there's a weather MCP effectively, and there's a data warehouse that these language models actually write real SQL against, right? So it's not it's like as deterministic as possible. And then basically you can kind of reason through it that, get the rainy days, those are actual days. So I'm going to use the days as the kind of where clause or whatever in the SQL statement, and then pull back the data and kind of render it appropriately to the seller, to the customer.
This hybridization between we're going to make it write real SQL code, so it's actually doing deterministic calculations. This feels like the turn that the whole industry is making, right? We're not just going to let the models run off and do their thing. We're going to use the models to accept natural language input, and then we're going to make sure we do real computers in the back. Is that term feels very big, right? It feels like not just we're figuring out how to use the models better, but maybe we're acknowledging that the models can't actually do the work that everyone thinks they can do. Do you see that as a limitation, or do you see it as an extension of capability?
I think it's an extension and just a realization of how to use, for many years, I don't think we totally knew how to apply these things to real problems, right? There was this like very cool technology, and there was this like capability overhang that we just didn't know how to apply this perfectly. Tool use and context window expansion, right? Both of those you kind of have to do together because you kind of have to put all this data somewhere, are really the two big unlocks. And then the ability for these agents to work over a longer time horizon, right? So 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes. Like it'd be totally reasonable for proactive insights for an agent to work for a couple of minutes or more, right? Collecting data, testing it, making sure it's right before it builds a comprehensive report, kind of like deep research and others. And I think those two innovations have really unlocked, I would think, far more tangible business value than the kind of earlier, I would say, chat-based conversational interactions that were kind of the very beginning of this whole era.
I guess, I'm focused on you saying as deterministic as possible, right? Because the idea that you definitely need a deterministic traditional computer in the background of the interface seems important to me. Is that as important to you as it feels to me?
My mental model now is more that these large language models are becoming more like the CPU of a lot of these different products that we're building. And you need to give the CPU different things, right? You need it to give it access to data. You need to teach it how to use sandboxes and different tools so that it can effectively learn and get stuff done. You need like some working memory, right? You need all these like constructs. And I think ultimately, even if you ask someone to go do something, like they sometimes do the job wrong some percentage of time, right? Humans using computers are also not deterministic, even if clicking the button is 100% deterministic. And this is where I think there's really interesting UI challenges and things that we're working on and going to be releasing kind of in our spring release next year is how can we have these large language models prompt the user with actual generative interface. I'll give you another example. So I want to bulk update all the prices of my menu, right? Let's say increase prices by 5%. In one world, you would just have the agent go do that and commit those changes, and those would go live on your point of sale and your buyer surfaces. That's pretty risky, in my opinion. Another path you could be, say, okay, I'm going to generate a form and a list of all the things I want to change, and then the user, the customer, needs to go click OK, boop, and then that actually goes and commits those changes. And I think that's the next frontier. After we've done a lot of work as an industry on kind of this tool use agentic thing, is like, how do we have more natural interactions in a generative UI construct to help sellers kind of use these tools? And I think that the realization behind all of that was that if you look at most UI, it's really forms and lists of things. Mm-hmm. Right. So if, it's pretty straightforward to have these large language models generate those UIs. And then what you can actually do is, for the longest time, the builders of tools, right, like the software teams, were specifying and designing the user interfaces. I think for the first time ever, the interface is generated by the customer or the user. Right? I think it's like a pretty profound way to think about what the future over the next couple of years is going to be with how these products are going to be built.
That's the tension that I find the most fascinating in all of this. I am a proponent that no UI should be hidden. This is just, right. I grew up in the sort of Windows and mice era. Like, we just put all the UI in front of your face. Like, we moved from the command line to here are all of the buttons. And then over time, we have abstracted everything away. And now the kids don't know how to use file systems. Like, there's a real push and pull there that has some real consequences. The iPad kids do not know what files and folders are. Now we're going to abstract more of the UI away, but you can just ask the magic box to do anything, and it will at least tell you that it's doing it. How do you see that transition? Because there's a part of me that says people won't actually know the full capabilities of the tools you're giving them.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a very interesting philosophical discussion. I think the way that I would think about this is, back in the day where, I used computers back then too with file systems and dragging, as we've built more software on top of those things, we've been able to do more with the tools, right? And honestly, like, I don't know if Gmail has files and folders behind it. I don't really care, right? I can do way more with Gmail than I can do with all those things in the past. So part of me is that, one, like, AI tools need to build trust with the customers and people using it. That's, I think, a bedrock belief that we have when building these. And that means there's some sort of like explainability about what's happening. And our strategy is to be able to present sellers kind of what's going to happen and let them take some control over what's going to happen. As far as how this is going to impact, my kids or the next generation of people using computers, I'm not totally sure we've figured that one out yet.
There's just a part of me that says if you don't show people what they can do, they won't even try. And then what scrambles that with AI is you can ask it to do anything, and it will just confidently say it's happening, whether or not it actually is happening. And there's some new dynamic that needs to be invented there. I want to just talk about databases for one more second and how AI might interface with them. And then I want to talk about just money, because it is a weird time for money, and I want to make sure we talk about that a little bit. I've been talking a lot about what I call the DoorDash problem, which is you turn every business into a database, and then the AIs can just come and use that database, and services like Uber or DoorDash might lose the value add, right? They might all just become wholesalers or commodity providers of sandwiches. Small businesses have that same problem, right, in different ways. Square, sitting on top of a business or running a business, having a bunch of AI features that can talk to a bunch of other AI agents that might run around and do things, kind of creates that problem at scale for a bunch of small businesses in a neighborhood, right? Burrito delivery might change, and maybe we actually bring the power back to the quick service restaurant in the neighborhood to just be the provider of burritos without a DoorDash sitting on top of them and extracting fees. Is that on your mind as a potential solution or change that AI might bring about?
I think everyone is going to want to expose capabilities to these agents, right? And let those agents do certain things on their behalf. I think at the end of the day, we want to make sure that sellers and customers can build some sort of relationship, right? I think I firmly believe that, the main streets and the neighborhoods of the world are better because of interactions that you have at those small businesses. DoorDash is notorious for trying to kind of separate the customer from the seller, right? And have kind of the DoorDash tax, as you call it. I think for us, what we want to do is just support end-to-end seller interactions, right? And if we can have agents enable that and make that better, then that's definitely something we're interested in.
As you're saying this, Square has done a big integration with Uber Eats, DoorDash, Grubhub, because that is the audience funnel. That's where the customers come from for a lot of these restaurants. Is that in tension with one of our goals is to enable more direct customer relationships?
At the end of the day, we have to help sellers sell where they want to sell, right? We can't control that. We shouldn't control that. We should enable that in whatever ways. I think the goal for us is to provide enough tools to enable sellers to create direct connections with customers. It's one of the reasons why we launched this new neighborhoods product built into Cash App, because we want sellers to maintain and kind of enhance the interactions that these sellers have with customers, mainly around loyalty programs and re-engagement. I think the more that we can do that, the better it is for the seller, and also over time, the better it is for customers.
The weirdest way to think about databases, in my opinion, is to think of money as one giant weird database. The banks are all just databases with fancy faces on top of them. Credit card companies are just databases. Jack Dorsey is big into crypto, which is a decentralized database of money. Bitcoin is just an openly readable database that you can transact on. How do you think about that interaction? Block has big investments in crypto and Bitcoin. Those numbers go up and down. That might change the company's balance sheet day to day. And then obviously you can transact in alternative currencies. How do you think about that relationship? Because it is like the last database to conquer.
I think effectively the whole space is fascinating. And if I think just from a Square perspective, that we always want to help sellers accept any sort of payment, right? And just make the sale. That's how we were founded. And that's one of our core principles. Sellers can't control how customers want to pay, right? Which is why we truly believe helping sellers accept any type of payment is super important. Back to my point about democratizing technology, right? There's a lot of talk around Wall Street having Bitcoin treasuries and all the other kind of tools that they have. I truly believe providing those as options to small businesses and guardrails and guidance and education is important, right? We should give sellers choice. I believe that they're far more intelligent and can make those decisions for themselves. And I think if you kind of see about all the investments and all the tools that we're building within the Bitcoin space, it's really that. It's, helping sellers accept Bitcoin, and they can settle in fiat. They don't have to take Bitcoin. That's fine. Bitcoin as a payment rail is super interesting. Our goal is to make Bitcoin everyday money. It doesn't mean you have to hold Bitcoin, right? You can choose to hold fiat if you'd like to. And again, giving sellers that choice, I believe, is super important.
Is it fast enough to transact in Bitcoin today to be usable on a payment terminal?
The Bitcoin mainnet, like the Bitcoin network, isn't fast enough to transact. However, Lightning is fast enough. And this is where Block has made, I would say, monumental investments in the Lightning network. We're one of the largest Lightning nodes. And if you combine those capabilities, you get both all the benefits of the Bitcoin network with the speed that Lightning provides.
There's a very philosophical crypto question, but here we are. The argument against Lightning is that it centralizes Bitcoin in specific ways, right? That people actually hold the Bitcoin, and then now you've just built a database again that some centralized providers hold, and you've reduced the actual decentralized nature of Bitcoin. Do you buy into that?
I think it's important to have technology be as usable as possible. Right.
That is a very polite way of answering that question.
Yeah, I think it's important that that we can kind of enable those technologies. As far as the specifics of Lightning versus Bitcoin and all the trade-offs, I think that's for other people to talk through.
When I think about crypto generally and why you might transact in it, why you might not transact in it, the idea that number always go up, just the first thing that comes to my mind. And it actually today you and I are talking, and Bitcoin is down substantially. So maybe the answer to this is it feels different today than on every other day. But, if I had a Bitcoin, I can't think of a good reason to spend it. To me, this is a real problem, is that the culture of Bitcoin is you should just hold it as long as possible because number always go up. Are you seeing significant transaction volume in Bitcoin on your network?
Not significant, no. But I believe what we want to see over time is giving both sellers and customers an option. Right. At the end of the day, there's not a lot of options for digital currencies or digital ways to do transactions, let's just say, that aren't Visa and MasterCard. Right. You have ACH, kind of slow. Right. You have other payment mechanisms and payment rails. So we just believe that it's important to offer options, and sellers and customers, again, will choose technologies that are both more cost effective, better user experiences. And as long as we keep investing in that, I believe good things happen over time.
Are you seeing increased Bitcoin transaction, or is it just flat de minimis?
Can't comment specifically on the kind of number of transactions. We're seeing a lot of adoption and interest in just the Bitcoin product portfolio, right? So conversions is taking off a ton, right? Which is basically taking a percentage of your sales and converting those to Bitcoin. And there's a ton of excitement from a lot of sellers and a lot of customers on our very recent Bitcoin payment rail launch a couple weeks ago.
This is what I mean. I can't think of a reason to sell Bitcoin. By the way, I'm not allowed to hold Bitcoin. It's just like holding stocks. It's a thing we can affect the price of. But I understand why you would hoard Bitcoin. Why a seller would be like, oh, I can just convert my revenue to Bitcoin. This is great. It's very easy. Can you think of a reason why you should use a Bitcoin if you're holding one? That isn't crimes. I'll set aside crimes, but can you think of a reason?
Ultimately, people need to make decisions for themselves, right? And I think I want to build the technology so that people can make those decisions and that they don't have gatekeepers, right, that are making decisions for them. And as long as I can do that, I think it's up to those people to make the best decisions for them, whether that be to sell, transact, et cetera. And I think that's kind of how I think about both prioritizing products, but also kind of what we build and how we build it.
I'm just going to say, I've been asking for years, why would anyone spend a Bitcoin? And no one has ever given me a reason. We've talked about the future of money. Let me just drag us into the past of money to close this out.
Sure.
You run point of sale terminals. You run hardware. You have to accept cash. The United States government just decided to round up all cash to 5 cents. We're just getting rid of pennies. Goodbye. How has that affected your business? Did you know that was coming? Do you have to recode the point of sale terminals to be done with pennies?
So I think a couple of things. First is many countries, Canada and Australia, already do this, right? So we're live in Canada and Australia. So we've had to build the features and capabilities to let sellers do roundups and all that other stuff. So we're excited to just enable that for US sellers. Now, there's always a transition period where it's a little bumpy to start and then it gets better over time. And from just a pure point of sale, helping sellers run a business, we're ready and set for them to make this transition.
Did you know it was coming, or did you just wake up one day and say, "Oh, do the Canada thing"?
We got a little bit of heads up, but not a ton. No.
Does it feel like a lot of work? Or does it feel like it will change transaction volumes or average pricing? How's that going to work?
I would guess that there would be very nominal changes in this. Like if you think, a lot of companies already do roundups to help charities and other kind of local initiatives. So I believe that the elimination of the penny and kind of rounding up a little bit isn't going to like meaningfully change the behaviors we see just in the industry. Time will only tell, though.
Do you know how many pennies you handle, like point of sale terminals handle today?
That's a fascinating question. I don't know offhand, but you know what? I'm going to go check it out right after this now.
Yeah, I'm dying to know. You've given us so much time.
Yeah.
Come back to us with a penny answer. We'll put it in. I'll mention at the top. Well, this has been great. You got to come back. I know you've got some AI features and new products to launch. Come back and let us know all about them.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. This has been a great convo. Appreciate it.
I'd like to thank Willem and I for taking the time to speak with me, and thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to let us know what you thought about this episode or really anything else at all, drop us a line. You can email us at decoder@theverge.com. We really do read every email. Or you can hit me up on Blue Sky or Threads. Also, another quick reminder, we're running a special end-of-the-year mailbag episode of Decoder later this month where we answer your questions about the show. Who we should talk to next, what we should dig into next year, what you want more of, what you want less of, really all of it. Send your questions to decoder@theverge.com, and we will do our best to feature as many as we can. If you like Decoder, please share it with your friends and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. We'll see you next time.